We live in a very expensive area of the country. This job would not pay you enough to support you with an apartment. Do you have family here or people you could live with? What would you do if you moved here and it did not work out?
This is not a comedy. This is not a meme generated for views and clicks. This is actually a real email a Redditor received from a company in response to a job application he sent. About a week and a half ago, I made a video highlighting how the economy's so screwed for young people now that jobs not only don't pay them enough to cover their basic living expenses, they don't even pay enough to cover the costs of the job itself. That's right, most jobs these days now literally cost more than they pay. When I made this video, most people in the comments agreed and shared their own experiences. But of course, you have the occasional boomer straggler who thinks that I'm exaggerating and that you just have to work harder. Well, you don't have to take my word for it anymore, as companies are now literally admitting themselves that their jobs now cost more than they pay. Modern corporations are an absolute pathetic joke. A great point that people repeatedly brought up in the comments section of this Reddit thread is that if companies can't provide a livable wage to their workers, they absolutely deserve to fail and go out of business. Capitalists will say that we can't raise the minimum wage because companies won't be able to afford paying their employees anymore. But at the same time, they'll say we should abolish welfare programs because if we can't afford to support ourselves, we deserve to go homeless and starve. This is just insane hypocrisy. I just want consistent standards across the board for both individuals and corporations. Stop looking at poor people who can't afford their rent as bottom-feeding losers. Unless you're prepared to look at loser corporations who can't afford to pay their employees a living wage the exact same way. Laziness and entitlement are a two-way street. Young people aren't the lazy ones for not wanting to work. Modern corporations are the lazy ones for not wanting to pay a decent wage. Gen Z and millennials aren't entitled for wanting better wages. Boomers and corporations are entitled for thinking they're entitled to cheap minimum wage youth labor that can't remotely keep up with the cost of inflation. Inflation that they caused, by the way, with their idiotic economic politics and reckless spending habits. Going back to this email here, let's really break it down and hold these corporations to the same standards they want to hold you to. First of all, they say they're based in a very expensive part of the country, and they use that to justify why they can't pay you enough to afford an apartment. This is the most lazy and entitled nonsense ever. If you're based in an expensive part of the country, presumably it's because that place gets more business than cheap rural areas, which is why you do business there. This then should also mean that they generate more income, which you should then pay your employees with. In what world are you so freaking entitled that you believe you're entitled to the privileges of living in a richer business area without having to pay the expenses of being there? I mean, can you imagine if a young person wrote to a landlord and said, "Hey, I want to rent an apartment in a very expensive area of the country, but I don't make enough to pay for rent there. Could I just live with your family or something?" You'd instantly be laughed at and looked at as the scum of the earth. So again, I just want consistent standards. We should look at this company in the exact same way. Next, they go on to say, do you have family or people you could live with? I literally laughed out loud when I read this sentence. Gen Z is constantly under criticism from delusional boomers about not wanting to work and still living with their parents. Yet companies are now admitting even if they do hire you and you do work, you're still going to have to live with your parents. So boomers created this dog shit economy where you have two options. Option one, you can work 40 hours a week and live with your parents. Or option two, you cannot work at all for the exact same result. And they want to make you believe you're lazy for taking option two. No, it's the exact opposite. You should refuse to work if you're not going to be rewarded for it in any way. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. Companies now, by their own admission, are not even trying to hide the fact that their jobs themselves cost more than they pay. The high living costs of a business-oriented city are absolutely a job-related expense. And by their own admission, their job itself doesn't pay you enough to cover that job-related expense.